Hi everyone, welcome to Caribbean Progress. Today I'll be speaking with Craig Palsson. He's an assistant professor at the Hudson School of Business at Utah State University. Craig has published some really interesting research on matters of Haitian economic growth and political economy. He also speaks fluent Haitian Creole and has two YouTube channels, one where he speaks completely in Creole and the other where he explains economic concepts in English. And of course, I'll be adding links to all of these in the show notes. Now, on to the show. So, hi Craig.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good. Thank you for coming on the show today. I want to get right into the conversation. There's so much I want to cover. It's like one of those topics that, is one of those endless holes you can fall down and not ever get up. But I do want to start off, let's say, your introduction and your interest in Haiti is a very particular one. And I think that'll be a very good place to start. Why are you so interested in researching Haiti?
Yeah, so I lived in Florida for 2 years, serving as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And when I went there, they asked if I would learn how to speak Haitian Creole to work with the immigrants there. And so that was back in 2007. And for 2 years, I focused on just, getting to know immigrants from Haiti and just going to church with them, just enjoying that a lot. And it ended in 2009. And about 6 months later is when the earthquake hit. And I hadn't been to Haiti yet at this point. I'm only getting to know Haiti through the immigrants in Florida. Mm-hmm. And so what's really interesting is I went to Haiti after the earthquake, and I don't know what Haiti was before the earthquake. Like my whole image of it is just all post-quake. But in January 2010, I was on a path. I was studying economics. I thought I'd become a management consultant or something. And the earthquake hit. And I was just thinking of all of my friends in Florida, how their families were doing, and also understanding that I spoke Haitian Creole, and that's not a widely had skill outside of Haiti. And so I just thought, man, it'd be really cool to be able to work in Haiti, do more stuff, just take the skill and keep going. And had just the idealistic idea. As I was walking around a career fair that week, that's why I bring up the management consulting. I was trying to get into some management consulting firms or whatever, but then also just thinking of all this made me feel, what am I really going to do in management consulting? I feel so empty. I'd much rather be working in Haiti and doing something there. And had the idealistic view that, if I went and got a PhD and understood more about economics, maybe I would be in a better position to take those skills in economics, combine them with the love and language, and be able to maybe do something towards policy in Haiti. Mm-hmm. After that, I went and got my PhD, and my dissertation was on the economic history of Haiti.
So you said you went to Haiti after the earthquake. What was that like being there after the earthquake? Let's say post-earthquake Haiti.
Yeah. So again, I have nothing to compare it previous, but I think a lot of things were very similar. You get to the airport, you get out, and you just have a bunch of kids asking you for money or all those kind of things. And that was kind of the first shock. This was my first time to a developing country as well. So that was a little interesting. But then I just remember as we're driving away from the airport, you just see all the tents still set up just around beside the main road. And then as we're going and getting into where we wanted to be, which is Leogan, which is a little bit outside the capital, you just saw that buildings had been flattened and people were living in tents everywhere. It was pretty dire. But also my experience there was very much, I wouldn't say I'm deep into effective altruism, but that experience makes me realize why it's such a persuasive thing. Because I spent 2 weeks in Haiti. I was working with a group from my college, and I was bringing the language skills. And they're like, oh, we want you to also teach some sanitation and hygiene classes. And we're going to go in and we're going to teach them square foot gardening. And I had never done any of those things. And look back at it now, it's just so silly to think what was really going to help these people in the wake of this terrible earthquake was for me to go down there and start teaching you guys some square foot gardening techniques. That's going to really pull you out of it. And so I share that story with my students today and show them look, this is how much it cost me. I could have been working that week. This is what the plane ticket costs. Look how much money I could have just sent to somebody. Instead, I made zero impact there. So that's one of the biggest things, that first experience was just how silly it was that's what I was doing.
Are you familiar with that really good essay that Junot Diaz wrote back in 2011 or 2010 about the Haitian earthquake? It was called Apocalypse, and it was published in the Boston Review. I don't know if you read that one.
No, I don't recall it at least.
No, okay. So I think that's probably, it wasn't intended this purpose, but I think that's probably one of the best essays written about infrastructure issues in the Caribbean. And it was called Apocalypse because, as a famous writer, novelist, he has a very different approach to think about these problems. He's not an economist or a policy expert, but he made the point that there are no such things as natural disasters. There are only social disasters. And in this case, the apocalypse, different meanings from biblical texts and so on, apocalypse has more than one meaning. And one of these meanings is the end that reveals the end, essentially. It's something that is so massive that reveals the problems that we live with and we exist with. And in this case, from my view, his view, as perhaps even your view, given what you just said, is that if you don't have really good growth, infrastructure, economic growth, essentially, social well-being doesn't actually come naturally. And all these smaller projects that you have going on doesn't add up to that much. You need these bigger, better policies to really push forward growth and change in the country. That was his essentially argument in that essay.
Oh, I totally see that. Especially what I like to point out is that lots of people remember January 2010 as the Haitian earthquake, right? You bring that up. Very few people remember, I think it was February 2010, maybe March, the Chilean earthquake. And the Chilean earthquake was 10 times more powerful. And the deaths maybe were in the double digits. To be generous, let's say 100 people died in Chile compared to 200,000 in Haiti. 10 times the magnitude, and yet hardly anything in what impact. And so it is very clear that natural disasters, social disasters, I can see that link. There's no reason why Haiti couldn't have been better off if they had been prepared for those things. That's deep. There's lots of things in the layers there. But yeah, like that kind of earthquake, we get those all the time. It hit a place that was densely populated and had terrible infrastructure.
Yeah, and I want to go into those layers. There are so many layers deep in this conversation. To start off, one of the things that I try to tell people more recently when they have all these policy conversations about how to help Haiti today in 2023. And I always mainly point that, but Haiti is not really a country right now. It was a country, but there's no good definition of country you can apply in this situation that actually Haiti falls into. I'm curious, in what way can we even discuss Haiti in terms of policy conversations now that essentially someone has to do something for something to happen else? If there's no elected government, if there's no elections happening, if there's no especially public sector at all, can we even consider this to be a conversation that we can have right now on how to help Haiti as a country kind of get past the current problems?
Is it a country seems like a deep philosophical question to me, but like, is it a failed state? Like, I think right now you would definitely look at Haiti as a failed state. And I take failed state not as like some permanent characteristic of it. There were times when it was functional and now it's failed and something needs to happen to get them out of there. But like you were saying, they haven't had elections at any level since 2015, I believe. Right now, there are no elected politicians. Like all of their terms have run out. The prime minister is running the country by decree ever since the president was assassinated in July 2021. And that prime minister, he has like a lot of links to the assassination. It's suspicious how strongly tied he is to a lot of the key characters there. And of course, you have to take into account that ever since last summer, gangs have overtaken the country. I wouldn't say the country as a whole, but certainly the capital is being divvied up among gangs. And right now, in fact, there's maybe a slight sliver of hope that civilians are now fighting back against these gangs. And there might be some progress made there. But in terms of the government, completely failed at this point. And it's reflected in these discussions on policies. We're talking just as a summit on helping Haiti has concluded in Jamaica, and no clear policies or action plans were laid out at this point. It was very clear that the Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, has zero intention on doing anything to move forward if he has to give up any sort of power. There's no negotiating with anyone right now. There's no way for people to be held accountable in Haiti for those decisions being made. And it's just really unclear how something is going to become a Haitian solution to this problem without it becoming something outright civil unrest or, who do they talk to? Who's going to be the one speaking for the Haitians other than this prime minister who holds all the cards right now and is definitely not thinking of the best interests of the country.
Yeah, I think that's very blatantly true. So let's go back quite a while, I would say, to kind of tease out why the institutional decay of Haiti has been so rapid. Or, as some would say, never really got to a point where it stabilized in the first place. And that kind of still materializes right now in these situations. And people usually would start saying, okay, everything went wrong in 1825 when they had to pay the indemnity to France. That's when the troubles started. I suspect you don't agree with that particular argument.
Yeah, I wouldn't put 1825 as any particularly important. I mean, that we have the indemnity, right? So if we're looking at institutional quality versus quality of life, let me just do the basis. If you look at poverty in Haiti and what we know today, just commonly referred to as the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, certainly in the Caribbean. If you look in the 1800s, Haiti actually looks like it's doing pretty well. Like it's certainly not a super rich country. And it's definitely on the poor half of countries in the Western Hemisphere. But many times it looks like it's doing better than the Dominican Republic, than Jamaica, than Puerto Rico. It's in the running with all of these countries throughout there. And that's because at that time, a lot of them are all doing similar things of kind of just small scale farming, not any big agriculture. And then that starts to shift at the early 20th century. And that's when we really start to see divergence between Haiti and the rest of the region. But if we want to talk about the institutional stuff, a lot of those institutional problems were going on during this time. They just didn't have effects that trickled down to the rest of the people, other than the fact that you couldn't get large-scale plantations or anything. So you have the revolution starts in the 1790s. So if you're looking in 1789, Saint-Domingue, colonial Haiti, is about 400,000 slaves and then about 40,000 free whites, ballpark. I mean, obviously it was just at a pressure cooker tipping point. Something was going to happen. Slave revolt comes in. Great. Toussaint Louverture is the head here. He's like the George Washington figure for Americans, just coming in leading this. But then Toussaint's taken away and he dies shortly thereafter. And his right-hand man, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, takes power. And Jean-Jacques Dessalines, a lot of people really like Dessalines. He's a revolutionary figure. But to me, like a lot of the problems really start when it shifted from Toussaint, who I think Toussaint had a vision of how to bring Haiti forward as this vengeful nation, but trying to synthesize like, okay, yeah, we do not want slavery and like we want to overcome these abuses, but we also understand that we want to welcome all people here. He leaves and Dessalines left, and Dessalines has a couple of times where he's just very vengeful against the French, kicking the whites out of the country. And I mean, it's a perspective I totally can see. You understand that like they're going to be upset about what's happened, but also I think it really puts them on this bad path going forward on how do we handle institutions in this country. There's this fantastic book that I just read called Haiti's Paper Wars, and it's about how a lot of early post-independent Haiti was this debate between should we have an empire or should we have a republic? And the idea of how much should individual rights be subdued to attain greater goals?
Was this part of the reason why they had the actual split between Christophe and Henry? Was that debate, or was that going to be before or after?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, that's the debate, right? So they come in. So Jean-Jacques Dessalines is more of an empire guy. He gets assassinated. But then you have Christophe and Alexandre Pétion, and they're on different sides of this debate. Pétion thinks it should be a republic, that we should just have individual rights, that the state should be relatively small. And Christophe is like, no, like the state should be big. There's bigger things here that we're trying to accomplish. And sometimes that's going to mean that individual rights need to be suppressed to attain the greater good. So then it divides into the north and the south. The north is the Kingdom of Haiti with Christophe. South is the Republic of Haiti with Pétion. And they stay divided up until Christophe's death in 1820. But that's showing you this difficulty that Haiti has always had with trying to solve problems by making sure that parties come to agreement or that parties get some sort of payout from things. A lot of theories of government are these theories of like rent sharing among elites. We have this pie, we're going to come together and we're going to say, well, this group has this interest, this group has this interest. This is how we're going to create an equilibrium where everybody at least wants to be together and we don't fight. And if fighting starts breaking out, then we're going to come to some sort of range where we say, okay, how do we negotiate through this? Because no one really wants to fight. I mean, Chris Blotman's Why We Fight is a great book that talks about this process. Haiti had a really hard time coming to this equilibrium of how do we create a country where people are at least satisfied with the equilibrium. Maybe we're splitting rents, maybe we're taxing people like crazy, but we at least have elites who have an interest in making sure the state is stable and not, hey, we need to just like fight anytime something comes up. And so this book says that this debate between empire and republic is like a big part of it going through those first couple of decades. I mean, it's a pretty convincing argument. It was definitely more of an ideological argument than I was used to. The other interpretation is Mats Lundahl, who's the most prominent economic historian of Haiti. He says that this all gets rooted in the land redistribution that happens after independence. So you take all these plantations, the government's confiscated them, now you split them and divide them among the population. And instead of the typical Latin American country where everybody has plantations, or you get these large plantation owners who have rents that they can extract through large-scale agriculture, everybody's on small-scale agriculture. And so there's no way for you to extract rents there. And so the only way is to go through politics. And so they're constantly fighting in politics to try and get the rents that come from exports, that come from any other way that the government is generating revenue. And that there's constant turnover because there's just fight over the rents there. I think there's a place for both of those arguments. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. But we don't have as much quantitative information on what was going on back then. We have just like a lot of debates and a lot of narrative without actually showing, okay, this is where how much rent was being divided between the countries. This is how these agreements were working out. And I'd like to see something like that before I get really invested in any one of these hypotheses.
Okay, so we have the start of the split going forward. We have the Empire-Republic split. And then after death, you have, I believe it was Boyer, that kind of reunited both of the sides back together. But then I would assume that that kind of tension didn't just go away because Boyer is now president and things happen. I'm curious, why is it that even after reunited, the institutional formation still never got to a point where even after Boyer, even down to Salouk, from Boyer down to Salouk, still, things still never stabilized. Was there some missing thing in the institutional, let's say, bones, skeleton of the country that things could not stabilize even at this point?
Yeah, and this is where the book Haiti's Paper War was really challenging the ideas I had before. Because again, the hypothesis was there's just no rents other than fighting in the government. And then this book saying, well, there's actually like a fundamental ideological conflict going on. And people are trying to debate, what does liberty mean? What I think that's her main argument is liberty. Is it the freedom to have your individual rights, or is it freedom from this external influence, in which case individual rights have to be suppressed? It's very strange to me that they're not able to come to some sort of negotiation. I don't know what the fundamental institutional mechanism is here. And to me, this early period is actually evidence that Haiti was a fairly high capacity state. So Boyer goes in and takes over the Dominican Republic. And from, is it 22 to 44? 1822 to 1844, I believe. It's all united under one government. You had to have at least a decent amount of state capacity for you to exert control over the entire island. I'm very impressed with the gazette we have throughout Haiti's history. Haiti is constantly publishing a gazette, constantly reporting on some economic key indicators, reporting on the laws that they're passing. Often they're publishing transcripts of the debates going on in the legislature. It looks like a fairly decently established bureaucracy and state. It's shocking to me that it struggled so much. Actually, one of the big signs of resilience is that because presidents were dying so much, well, I guess dying isn't the right term, but out of the first 24 presidents, 17 of them didn't serve their full terms. Like 17 had been ejected from their office. And even though you're constantly having this kind of turnover, the bureaucracy is just going forward. They just keep doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's not to say there isn't corruption, there isn't all these other things, right? But like as I get more into researching this period, my idea of like Haiti just didn't have state capacity, it keeps getting challenged just a little bit at a time. And I'm trying to figure out where that disconnect was itself. It seemed like the state was getting some things done, but there's something else that's preventing them from establishing some sort of political equilibrium where stability is going forward. There's another historian, Marvin Chochot. He argues that a lot of this is the revolutionary heritage of the Haitians, that the state was seen as some sort of enemy, seen as inherently coercive, which kind of goes with this empire argument as well, and that this was the checks and balance system that Haiti had developed. Rather through a formal political method, it was, we're going to have regular uprisings in the towns. They're not always going to make it up to the national level. It's going to keep the state in check, so that way it never gets strong enough to enforce coercive labor laws or do any of these things.
So what now about the arguments, let's say, by someone like Victor Bulmer Thomas, when he puts decent amount of emphasis on the external pressures that Haiti felt very early on in the state building process. So you have, of course, when Haiti declared independence, this was essentially the height of the Napoleonic Wars. Because of that, the US, with very tense relationship with Great Britain at the time, wanted to not go too hard against France, and France obviously had particular interest in Haiti. Therefore, the trade between Haiti and the US can never really stabilize, at least so early. And then, go forward, because you have situations where the Haitian government, in its capacity as a governing body, always had the threat of external pressure, military-wise. You had, the potential French invasion, potential in the US pressure, which obviously we'll get to. You also had the German problems in the naval blockades and so on. So all of that meant they had to spend such a big proportion of their public finances went just to militarization. And that constant militarization, that constant, let's say, non-support of other sectors really clamped down on the growth of the education and health and those things. Because that's one aspect of his external pressure argument. How really relevant is that when it comes to the state formation, institutions, and the essential economic growth of Haiti?
I think there's definitely merit to it. It's tough because I don't know how much legitimate threat there was to Haiti, but certainly Haiti thought there was a legitimate threat. And early on, there was definitely a case to be made that there's a legitimate threat. But a lot of early Haiti's institutions are being formed by this fear of invasion. There's a historian, Lacerte. He argues that xenophobia was this major barrier to Haiti. And it manifests itself at its root in a lot of things. So one of these is this fear that they're going to invade, we're going to militarize, and we're going to over-militarize. It seems like they're clearly spending too much money on forming a military rather than providing other public goods. But also in the Constitution itself, they're banning whites and foreigners from owning property in Haiti. And they developed so many institutions to ward this off. One of my favorite ones is foreigners, allegedly, if they died in Haiti, weren't allowed to be buried in Haiti for fear that would constitute some sort of claim on land there. And they didn't want to even let that start. They ban a lot of foreigners from directly participating in commerce in Haiti. And this obviously gets tweaked over time, but I'm working on a paper right now where even in the early 20th century, to operate a business in Haiti, you had to have a special license and you had to come in and register, and there were limitations on what kind of business you could be operating in. You couldn't deal directly with certain institutions. You had to have a Haitian intermediary. They're worried about not just this military incursion, they're worried about the commercial threat as well. And so they become very standoffish to foreign investment, which sets it up as a nice juxtaposition with the Dominican Republic on the same island, because the DR becomes very receptive to foreign investment. And a lot of that motivation is coming because they're afraid of Haiti. Haiti occupies the whole island up till 1844. And now the Dominicans are like, well, there's this Haitian threat on the west side, right? Gets to some of the origins of the conflicts today. They're begging in the 1860s or post 1860s with the US, with President Grant. Hey, you need to annex us. And they actually get an agreement drawn up, and it just never gets approved by the US. So they're like, okay, well, we're giving you lots of land. The Dominican Republic becomes very receptive to foreign investment and foreign involvement. And I think that comes to a big root of why these two countries start diverging, is part of that worry about what's happening externally. As far as like the direct military threat, it's hard for me to know like how serious that was, but they certainly were worried about it. And they formed a lot of institutions at the early time that have long ramifications, especially in the early 20th century when globalization starts becoming like the main theme for this area.
Okay, so sticking on the, let's say, public finance aspect of this, because of the one other part of the conversation is the size of the agricultural plots and essentially the land. I know you've done some work on this, the small farms problem. Because there was no economy of scale that could have been reached. That's one aspect of it. We had the large plantations, like large sugar plantation or large coffee plantation and so on. You couldn't have a proper industrialization process when it comes to including investment, including expertise, including management skills. That was not possible to be formed. And therefore, those kind of sectoral growth dynamics never were able to take place in Haiti. How big of a problem was that when it comes to a lot of the, I guess it goes back to the government rents and days of growth and days of actual reallocation of public finances? We have to actually earn money to reallocate money. How big of a problem was this small farms issue when it comes to the revenue generation of the country?
Yeah, I think small farms are one of the most underrated issues in Haiti because a lot of people see small farms today as a solution. Like, well, let's just like help optimize these small farms and produce there. And especially today, I'm like, these farms are producing nothing. Let's get these people out of farming and into something more productive. But yeah, I think as you said, I've written this is the main focus of my dissertation, was that we had all these institutions in Haiti that were really biased towards small farms. Like almost like that was I don't even want to say almost. The intent was, let's create small farms. So that way we don't have to ever worry about that plantation agriculture ever again. And the problem is you can only do so much with small farms, right? Like you can do subsistence cropping. The nice thing is coffee can be done on small farms. So you can do a cash crop at a reasonable scale to get some revenue. But if you see it, like it's mind blowing to see that Haiti, which during the 18th century, like on the eve of revolution, is supplying half of the world's sugar. And obviously the world is producing more sugar, so you wouldn't expect Haiti to keep that place, right? But by the early 20th century, it's producing no sugar. Like they just never get back into sugar. And you can see Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Cuba, even Jamaica, all taking off while Haiti is just staying behind without getting into sugar. And it prevents them from generating revenue, prevents them from getting in some of these technologies that even though like maybe you're not doing sugar forever, but you're at least getting people in who have experience with steam engines in sugar processing plants. They can build railroads that are transporting these all over the place, right? And then as you get that expertise, you get spillovers into other industries. You're losing out on a lot of that. And the other issue is that because you're on small farms, you get these externalities that no one can internalize the environmental degradation that's going on. There's no incentive to get capital in there. You're doing labor intensive farming. And so you're doing a lot of hoeing and very intensive to every square inch of your plot, which over time causes a lot of degradation. Right? Like in the US, we have issues where homesteading at 150 acres was seen as like too small and causing environmental problems. Like we know the environmental problems that came from that, right? Like Haiti is doing like 5-acre farms across the entire country. And like, it's no surprise that today Haiti's agricultural productivity, their soil is exhausted, it's depleted. You just don't have room for crop rotation. You don't have room for experimentation. If everyone's on small plots, you're just losing out on a lot of opportunity, even just if you want to stick in agriculture.
Is it really the case that one of the large motivating factors for the preference for small farms was to go against that slave period mentality of plantation work, or was there some other rationale given by the governments as a push factor, or by the actual Haitian as a pull factor when it comes to small farm cropping?
There's actually some recent work that I have on my desk that I need to get to, but there were definitely in Haiti's early times debates about whether they should keep this ban on foreign property ownership. People saw like we need to get to large scale agriculture. So Ann Eller has a paper on this. It's on my stack. I just haven't gotten to it yet. There are definitely people pushing against small farms. I think it's hard when you're going to have to go through large scale evictions, anything to do that. It's just going to be like a pretty big task. You think they'd be up to it with their over militarized government, right? But also, like I said earlier, with the work of Marvin Shoshot shows that there was a lot of local rebellions pushing against it. It's not like these peasants were just helpless or like hadn't had experience. Like a lot of them are coming from kind of being raised in a conflict environment where they're being trained to push back against any sort of coercion like that. And again, like there's this period where Haiti is not necessarily the poorest country in the region. Like it was actually an equilibrium that worked. People are doing fine. I don't think many of them know what other islands are doing, but they look pretty similar to those islands. And maybe they're not feeling a big incentive to move towards there. I do think that the argument that it's like this heritage of we broke away from slavery and we don't want anything that looks like that, I think that sometimes gets oversold in the literature. The biggest idea being you're getting hundreds of thousands of Haitians at this time migrating to the Dominican Republic, migrating to Cuba to work on plantations there. And those plantations, they're not slavery, though like a lot of historians like to say it's not slavery, but it's very close. Clearly, they're willing to go to great lengths to work in these kind of industries. And it seems to me that they would prefer if they could get that at home rather than having to go abroad where they have fewer protections, where they're having a foreign environment, they're away from family. There's just so many costs that come from migrating. And yet they're still doing that because they don't have anything at home. And then there's the argument that because there's so much opportunity abroad and a kind of selection that you get for the people who do move abroad, that might have weakened the resistance to coercion at home by saying, yeah, your strongest and most capable men, they're going to go over to the Dominican Republic and work on sugar plantations. And the ones that stay behind are the ones that might not be as strong, might not be as motivated. And when the government starts doing things, there's not much resistance there. It's just this argument that I've seen tossed out there. I'm not convinced by it, but it is interesting to see the memory of slavery was not strong enough to keep you from going and doing similar things if the wage was high enough.
So lots of instability continues across the century. I want to go forward a bit to, let's say, 1900 going into 1915. So 1915 was a particular moment in Haitian history where we kind of reference all the time now. And to me, even more interesting now because of some of the comments you will have from people given the current state of Haiti. And many people say, well, what else can you do besides intervention at this point in time? But that was tried before 1915 when the U.S. started occupation of Haiti. I want to tell us what led up to that very intense period. Firstly, and then afterwards, I kind of want to discuss why it didn't actually result in any kind of dramatic transformation of Haitian society that one would expect after that kind of occupation. But first, what led up to the rationale for the U.S. occupation in Haiti?
Yeah, spoiler alert. I might be pushing back against you saying it wasn't quite a dramatic transformation. So I've already mentioned that out of the first 24 presidents, 17 were removed from their office. Well, if you just look from 1911 to 1915, so over a 4-year period, there were 7 different presidents in Haiti. There, you've got people who are serving 3 months as president before the next coup happens and they're tossed out. I've seen some people refer to it as the ephemeral period. I don't know if this is like a widely adopted time, but it's just the government is constantly being overturned. In fact, I'm writing a paper on this time. I actually already have referenced this, but the title of the paper is A Whirligig of Revolutionary Presidents. That's what the New York Times referred to Haiti as. And I was just like, what a great term for what was going on at this time. And so you just have all of these presidents taking over the government and then being kicked out themselves.
Why was that happening so much in that very short time? What was going on?
Yeah, so again, it gets to a lot of this rent sharing, which is funny because we definitely have evidence that they were trying to appease people. So a new president would come into power and he would issue pardons almost immediately, but not just for his friends who helped him get into the government. He would pardon the previous government and say, don't worry, guys, we're not going to come after you. Let's just move forward. So it looks like they're trying to establish some sort of rent sharing agreement that says, don't worry, I'm the guy that's going to keep us intact here. But a lot lot of these people, they get into power, and then the person who helped them get into power is the one they're trying to take them down next. So obviously they're failing on some sort of rent sharing agreement here. Again, as over militarized as Haiti was, there wasn't a strong enough military loyalty or resistance to what was going on. And so you could easily round up these people who had been protesting locally or fighting back locally, and you had enough experience in the countryside that you could bring people in, throw out the president, pay off the people who helped you, and then start this process over again. But the biggest fear at this time is that the Germans have a pretty big commercial presence in Haiti. Some statistics are quoting it as Germans are controlling about 80% of commerce in Haiti. Germany is not the main source of exports. It's not the main source of imports. It's just whatever is going on in commerce, the ships that are being used in commerce, the banks that are being used, the merchants. Germans are finding themselves as a lot of the commercial intermediaries in what's going on in Haiti. And the US is looking at what's going on in Haiti and seeing all of this conflict and this power vacuum. And this is like right at the beginning of World War I. And they're worried that the Germans are going to come in, especially with the Panama Canal just opening up. And the Germans are going to gain the strategic foothold in a very important part of America's backyard. So there's this big stability motive for the US to get into Haiti and just keep things at bay. Let's stabilize, kick out the Germans. They sequester property from the Germans, right? They're trying to establish this stability there. There's at least a group of Haitians that are not excited about this, and they start pushing back. There are camps being set up in the east to resist. And so it becomes like one of the US's first big counterinsurgency programs. Like actually the hearts and minds doctrines and all this counterinsurgency doctrine that we have today, a lot of it is being formed in Haiti at this time. And so they start establishing the stability, and then they realize like, okay, we could leave right now, but if we do, it's all just going to fall apart. And so they actually extend the occupation and they start reorganizing it to try and do something that's going to establish something more long-term. A lot of their programs are not very successful. They're building roads, the roads fall apart. They do push forward some on education, but it's not anything very spectacular. And so they leave in 1934. Around like 1927, 1928, there's a small massacre in one of the port cities as people are protesting. It generates a lot of international bad will towards the occupation. And the US is like, all right, we got to get out of here. This is just a no-win situation for us. They leave in 1934. They still have some control over the treasury, basically, because most of the debt is being held by the US, but that gets paid off by the late 1940s, at which point the US breaks free clearly. But like one of the biggest things that the US did here, and also what they did in the Dominican Republic when they were occupying there, was establish a constabulary. They're establishing, military, police, all these kind of things that really build up state capacity in a very specific way. And it's this transformation of like, hey, it's not just militarized, it's we have a pretty effective way at controlling the population, stopping resistance. That's when Francois Duvalier comes around. He has this infrastructure in place that he's able to use to then build up his dictatorship. So that's like the biggest transformational thing is you had pre-occupation, this phase where you have tons of instability and for some reason the government can't control it. And then you have the opposite of that with the US occupation where they come in and they just show like, this is how you stop people from overthrowing the government. And then you have Duvalier, who's like the synthesis between these two periods of, I'm going to be a Haitian president who understands how to stop resistance and maintain stability for a long time, but it's going to be draconian. It's going to violate a lot of human rights and it's going to be a problem. But we'll have stability, guys. Don't worry. I think that's like a really big change and really underrated part of the occupation was that it put in the capacity that enabled dictatorships later on. And this is argued similarly on the Dominican side that Trujillo was able to use the similar infrastructure to enforce his long dictatorship.
Okay, I will grant that as a fairly substantial difference. But now you have the Duvalier and his son Duvalier and Papa Dot, Baby Dot. And they continue that long, let's say, tradition of dictatorship plunder in the country. And of course, that's a different stepwise change, but change essentially, I don't know for the worse, but continued bad situation in Haiti. And then I guess before we could go further, how then did that kind of dictatorship persist? It was a very, very bad. I can see your bookshelf. You have some Frank the Carter books there. He wrote he wrote the Dictator book somewhere there. I think he does reference have a whole chapter on Duvalier. I think he does. How was it? Gold star dictatorship in many ways. I was like Haiti. Why then the Duvaliers were able to persist so much? Was it because of this massive control they had over the country via the state security apparatus? It felt like, from my reading, they have so much more control than one would even expect, even just security. And how then did that kind of persist for so long?
Yeah, so I think a big part of this, and I keep bringing this up on, Haiti failed to establish a rent-sharing agreement that kept people wanting to keep the government stable. I think Duvalier figures this out. The common name for his goons are the Tonton Macoute. They're also known as the VSI. But he's deeply distrustful of the military. So he had worked with President Paul Magloire in the 50s, and Magloire had been opposed by the military. I think he was eventually kicked out by a military coup. And so Duvalier saw that and he's like, well, the military is clearly not my ally. And so he sets up this rural paramilitary group when he gets put in. And they call him the Tonton Macoute, which is basically like calling them the boogeymen, and gives them a lot of local authority in extorting people. You get put into our group, you can extort local businesses, you can recruit people. I think there's almost like a pyramid scheme to it where like you can recruit people and get stuff from them. Now all of a sudden you have a national institution that is invested and has the power to support your presidency. And if there's a threat, then you're going to actually have people who have skin in the game that want to push back against that threat. As one of the first things he does is dismantle the military, or at least take out most of the important players who could possibly resist him. There's this threat that comes in. We have a very similar situation like in Cuba. We have people who land in Haiti. It's like a 5-person crew or something that tries to single-handedly come in and overthrow the government. They get locked in a fort, and Duvalier is able to say he recruits citizens to come in and help him push back against this, winning people over by showing them, by using them. And so there gets to be this buy-in from a wider group of people through this paramilitary group that shows this is how you can make a decent living. You can rise about a little bit above where things are, and we keep the government stable. And along with that, Duvalier is starting to court international investment. We're starting to see some of the first manufacturing jobs coming in. And so there certainly are people who are seeing their standard of living go up during this time. And it's like, yeah, there's that bad stuff happening over there kind of aspect to it, but at least the economy is growing. And if I keep my head down, then hopefully everything works out fine for me. And so I think Duvalier was the first one who figured out how to get some sort of coalition to say, we see the benefit of having you in power, and we're going to stop the people who try to push back against that. And it doesn't seem like that big of an innovation. This seems like the standard thing to do. Give local people power that's connected with you. Give them the authority to just single-handedly stop any resistance. That's just like if you had the dictator's handbook, that was going to be like chapter 5. But for some reason, Duvalier figures it out, and previous Haitian presidents were unable to figure that out. And that innovation is what keeps him in power. There's this question when he dies and his son takes power, if his son is going to do it, and somehow his son retains power and then is able to keep that apparatus going. And that's like a true innovation in Haitian governance that led to 30 years of political stability and, frankly, pretty decent economic growth as they were bringing in all these manufacturing jobs. And part of that, the reason why they want to do that is because they're extorting the economy. They have an incentive of, if we bring in more factories, then we're going to personally get richer. So you can see why they would want to do that. But like, they're able to do that, and they establish all its stability. And then, I mean, frankly, it all falls apart. Thank goodness, because it was bad. Like, we don't want that. But also, we don't have the next stage of how do we achieve that coalition without also just doing terrible things to people, right? They just can't figure out that next step when the Duvaliers are deposed. Aristide kind of starts figuring this out, but it falls apart as well.
Could you kind of go into the transition between Duvalier and Aristide? Because even to me, it's not quite clear unless you what dynamics happened to move forward with that.
Yeah, oh man, I spend so much of my time in the occupation period. I probably don't have like the best account of what's going on in the early 90s, unfortunately. But 1986 about is when Baby Doc Jean-Claude Duvalier is ousted from office. And then you have this period of uncertainty, trying to figure out what the next step is. You're starting to move towards democracy. We want to elect, and we want to be done with the Duvalier part. Because even though the Duvaliers themselves are gone, a lot of those people who were in that power were there. In fact, the period after Duvalier is called Duvalier without Duvalier, because it's just as bad, but it's just like a little bit unchecked because you don't have that presidential authority there. I mean, Duvalier himself, the first Duvalier, had some pretty popular support, and that's how he came to power. Well, Aristide starts pushing forward and getting a lot of popular support as like a counter to this Duvalier ideal. And like politically was super popular, just overwhelmingly coming in, winning the election. But then the U.S. sees Aristide as a threat, or at least isn't a big fan of where this government is going. And then when the coup happens, the U.S. is like, yeah, fine, there's a coup. Sorry, guys. We don't really want to intervene that much here. I don't know. I think a lot of the discussion around Haiti is colored by a lot of people who want to take away agency from Haiti. Haiti is put on a pedestal as like this first and only nation to overcome slavery through the slaves themselves. Rightfully, awesome achievement. There's this great book called American Imperialism's Undead, where in the first chapter, this author outlines, look, this is how much has been written by historians on the revolution, and this is how much has been written on the occupation. It's just starkly different. And the argument is that people see the occupation as this sign that the revolution failed. Oh yeah, they revolted, but then eventually the state fell apart and you had to have this come in. So people don't want to see this revolution as a failure, because you have people who take racist interpretations of this and say, well, of course a black nation's not going to succeed. That's like the worst argument that you can make for these kind of things. It's just that they did a terrible job setting up their institutions, and there's lots of issues there. And so a lot of people want to put blame on Haiti's problems on external forces. And that removes a lot of the agency from Haitians themselves. Essentially, you're making the same type of racist arguments of Haiti can't make bad decisions themselves. Like the Haitian citizens, they're not making bad decisions. We don't want to blame them. It's something that the US is doing or that France is doing. So that takes away the fact that the US, even though they might have set up some of that infrastructure that Duvalier could exploit, Duvalier is still a very Haitian problem. It's not like the US came in and installed him and said, here, you be our puppet president here. No, he came in, gained the popular support, was enabled by all the institutions he set up. And then you have the issue where like he gets to a point where is the U.S. supposed to intervene and stop the Haitian, I don't want to say problem there, the thing that they have created? And I think you see some of these things throughout, even up to today, right? Where we want to keep blaming external forces for what's going on in Haiti and not realize that things like Duvalier, Aristide, a lot of stuff is just people supporting the wrong people and not necessarily an external thing.
Yeah, I think the external argument, at least some people take it too far. So for me, I'm from Barbados, in the Caribbean, grew up Haiti in the background all the time. But people always compare Haitian institutions to Barbados or Jamaica, who else? People never also go and point out, well, the reason why these other Caribbean countries like Barbados is so, let's say, stable over time, is that there was no sudden stop when independence came. Independence was a very, very gradual continuation of the already existing British institutions. Same for Jamaica, same for St. Lucia, so on and so on. The Haitian Revolution was a very sudden, hard break stop. It wasn't like you're continuing decades of growth. It's like, we have to start back from zero. And starting back from zero is never a very easy thing to do. So the sudden stop and sudden start rebuilding of institutions is I think a wholly underrated reason for a lot of the Haitian instability so early on, also continuing, of course, over time. And people don't want to give that because, as you mentioned, the agency loss problem. They don't want to make those points when it comes to Haiti. I don't want to take it very seriously. At least many people don't. At least.
Yeah, I agree. It's just very interesting that the people who are worried that if we say, well, Haiti became a failed state because of their own choices are saying is that African descendants can't govern themselves. That's not what it was. It was that you had these external forces that came in and influenced. And what you're saying is African descendants aren't able to make their own choices and get themselves out. They don't have that capacity for government. It's funny to me that the same people who would immediately stop one of those arguments, their counter argument is the same vein, right? It's two sides of the same coin. And yeah, I think if you look at the institutional issues, if you look at all these other things, it's just so clear that there are things that are fundamental across societies. Doesn't matter where they come from. Like if you're not setting up these correct institutions, if you're putting bad incentives in play, doesn't matter where you're from, this is going to cause problems. And I think there's a little bit of romanticism around Haiti because of that revolutionary background, where you don't want to criticize these institutions. People love that they banned foreign land ownership. And how big of an issue was that towards their long-run development? It's hard to get a real number on it, but it probably was not the best decision for their long-run economic development. But we love this romanticism of they broke off, they gained complete sovereignty, and now the only thing stopping them was that everybody else hated them. They're the beautiful kid in high school that is an outcast because they're too beautiful. No, they made some bad decisions.
Continuing forward a bit more now, one of the curious things about very recent Haitian politics, you also write about this, is the external election interference, which has been a consistent topic discussed here. The example of, I believe it was Celestine and Martelly.
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask it a different way. I want to fast forward a bit to a very recent example of outside election interference in Haiti. And I know you write about this also. And could you kind of explain why was Hillary Clinton in Haiti making decisions about who should run in an election actually very recently?
Yeah. So this is funny to go on my little rant of like, we keep blaming the external things. And then it's like, but like sometimes it's justified. Yes, there are some problems where external forces are messing things up. So, I mean, the earthquake in 2010 was just very inconsiderate because the timing was terrible. It should have picked another year to happen. I believe it was February 2010 when they were supposed to be elections. I don't remember the exact, but around that time, like they're getting ready for elections. This earthquake hits. And obviously you're not going to hold elections just weeks after this event. But one of the big calls from the international community as they're coming in and helping was, look, you need to keep democracy up. Like things have been so fragile. We do not want to have political problems be an issue going forward. We need to have elections. And Haiti, you can't serve 2 consecutive terms. So Préval was the president at the time. He wasn't up for re-election. The US and the international community were not excited about having Préval's successor. Anyone connected to Préval, they just saw as not going to be something that would fly. I haven't taken a close look at Préval's presidency, but it seems overall he was fine. And if you look at the low bar of Haitian politics, he was probably one of the best presidents in Haiti's history. But that's because he was elected, he served a full term, and then he gave up his position without any resistance. He did what he was supposed to do. So you can't really be too bothered by that. So anyway, you're heading towards fall, winter 2010. And even though Port-au-Prince is covered in tent cities, the international community is saying, you need to hold elections. We need to make sure that this democracy continues. And so they have the first round of elections, and it's not like the US where you have 2 main parties and they're duking it out on the national stage. You had Duvalier as like an ideology with his group, and then you have Aristide and his political party Lavalas, but Lavalas had been, through international agreements, prohibited from participating in the election, so they had been disenfranchised. And then you don't really have primary political parties, so you have 20, 25 people all running for president at the same time. And the way it works is you just run all these people against each other. If there's not somebody who gets 50% of the vote, you do a runoff between the top 2. Well, they run the first round of the election, and before votes are even counted, people are coming out and saying there's been widespread fraud because Préval has his successor, Celestin, running. You have Michel Martelly, who is the rapper who is running, 0 political experience. And then you have, I am blanking on her name, which is terrible. She's the former first lady. And so you have these 3 running against each other. Martelly and the first lady are coming out and saying, Préval, he's manipulating elections to let Celestine advance. We want to recount. And then all of a sudden they get these news. Oh, hold on a second. Like we should just like hear things out, actually. Because the news was he is not the clear winner. The first lady has the most votes. And then there's a very close tie, basically, between Celestine and Martelly. It was less than a percentage point difference between them. So you need to have a runoff, and it should be between the First Lady and Celestine, but it's so close of a margin. And there's these accusations that Préval cheated. And there's this chance, like it seems pretty clear that if Celestin makes it to the second round, the Martelly voters will go for him and he'll go and win the election. And the international community, again, they just don't want Préval's successor to be there. And so they put a lot of pressure and say, like, you need to get Celestin out of there. And it's just so strange because they're claiming that this is supposed to support the integrity of the election. We want people to have confidence in this. And if Celestin goes forward, again, did Préval cheat? I don't think there's any like definitive evidence that he cheated any more than anybody else cheated in the election is the thing. Sure enough, like eventually the pressure is put on. They're holding off for weeks and weeks.
But the pressure is put on whom or what group to actually get rid of Celestin?
Yeah. So they have the Provisional Electoral Council. So this is supposed to be the ones running the election. They're not technically the government, but it's supposed to be an independent body coming in and counting votes. And they refuse to announce the second round because you have the OAS and the US putting pressure on the electoral committee saying you cannot have him go into the final round. We won't support you. And they're pushing back for a while saying, like, this is what the results say. They go, I don't know how much of a recount they do. They do this really weird, let's sample some ballots. Let's recount them. It looks like these ones look like they're fraud. Let's throw those ones out. And now, what do you know? If we just look at those few ballots that we counted and throw some of them out, the margin now switches and Martelli is ahead. There's been some analyses done on this of like, this is a really bad way to try and like detect fraud or determine which way to go. But eventually, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton flies down to Haiti, meets with the electoral group and says, you need to push Celestin out of this. You need to make sure that the integrity of this election goes forward. She like walks out and the same day they announce, all right, the election's going to be between the First Lady and Martelli. And so Celestin gets kicked out. And then I don't know how much of a surprise this was to everybody. Martelli ends up winning the whole thing. The Celestin voters go for Martelli, which to me is just the reason why I wrote that paper was because of the sweet, sweet irony that there was an election between a former First Lady and a raucous pop star who had zero political experience. And the pop star wins because of a foreign influence in the election, which of course then in 2016, we have Clinton versus Trump and Clinton then claiming afterwards that she loses because Russia is meddling with the elections. It was just like the sweet irony of, it doesn't feel good, huh? Yeah, it's just this strange thing where, it's not that strange. There'd always been a little bit of like a soft touch from the US on Haitian elections. Even in the previous one, in 2005, 2006, when Préval was being elected, they ran that first round and Préval barely had 50% and technically did not meet the threshold for him to do the outright win, and he would have had to go to the second round. But they knew if he made it to the second round, there would have been a coalition formed among the other ones, and they would have gotten a worse candidate. I think there was a Lavlas candidate, but I can't remember. And so the US is monitoring the elections and says like, oh, there's like all these blank ballots. They don't fill them in, but they're like, how do we count these? And so they do some little accounting trickery to make it so once you count these ballots in a certain way, then Préval wins and he gets to go in there. But he was already right at 50%. That was just kind of like a little bit of a nudge to get him over. This was a very public and explicit intervention in the Haitian election that said, that candidate that is like the second most popular in the country, we are pulling him out and we're advancing the next guy. And then that guy wins. That guy would not have won without the US intervention. And so...
go ahead. I was going to say this is like a direct line to Jovenel Moise as well from Martelli.
Absolutely. Right. So Martelli wins in the next election in 2015. The research that I did went and looked at which places supported Celestin in the first election, because you might think elections are already so tough to run in these countries. And they're very costly for an individual to go out and vote. You have to stand around all day. You're risking your personal safety. Just so many problems with this. And then the guy I voted for was just kicked out by the US anyway. Like, what's the point of voting? And so I show that the places that were more in favor of Celestin in 2010 were less likely to show up and vote in 2015. And 2015 was really well known for its low turnout. And so there's kind of this direct path through, we're going to try and prop up the integrity of an election by undermining it. And then it has long run problems where turn out slow. Going into the election, it did not look like Jovenel Moïse was going to win. Jovenel Moïse was handpicked by Martelly. He was not the favorite going into the election, but it looks like a lot of those voters held back. Moïse wins. There's controversy over it. They do it again. Same thing happens. Moïse wins. And so, then you have the direct successor of Martelly, who is in office, and you have all these issues where at the beginning of that administration, all these corruption issues started coming up. You had the famous Petrocaribe. I'm trying to think of how you actually say it in English. There's the Petrocaribe money. There's this $2 billion, I think, that was supposed to go towards rebuilding the country, and most of it was embezzled. It shows that Martelly was big in it. It shows that Moïse was a benefactor of this. So you're getting these big protests that are locking down the country through 2019, going into 2020. Then, of course, you have COVID, which doesn't hit Haiti too bad, thank goodness. But then you have the assassination of Moïse in 21. And we're still sorting out the details of this, but a lot of it probably comes from the fact that Martelly was in office, Moïse gets there. It's hard to know the counterfactual, but there's kind of this domino that's just pushed over in 2010 that leads to this crazy, chaotic political position we're in. And again, it's one domino. We can't put all the blame on the international community for this because a lot of the stuff going on is still Haitians making the choices they're making. You can understand why people are wary about international solutions to Haiti when they see these kind of things happening.
You said there was a very low voter turnout for Moïse. How low is low are we talking about?
I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. For some reason, I'm worried about saying 8% because that seems too low. I think maybe it's only 8% of the country voted. It's just incredibly low. If you look at how many people actually voted and then how many voted for Moïse relative to the entire country, you realize that it was a very small proportion of the population that led to Moïse becoming the president.
That's very small indeed. Even 20% of the electorate, that's still very small. My goodness. Okay, so Haiti is this situation. As I see it, is this. Haiti has terrible institutions, very little prospects and pathways for economic growth and short-run future. External pressure or external help often doesn't lead to much success. And for various reasons, internal decision-making is suboptimal. What then do you think would be useful in a situation where all of these things come into play for Haiti to have some kind of forward motion?
It is just the hardest thing for me to think of because Haiti is in such a bad spot. Some external intervention needs to happen. And it's hopefully not that strange of an idea. When you're as small of a country as Haiti is, you just clearly don't have the resources and you clearly don't have state capacity. You need help. And even within the United States, Haiti is about the size of Massachusetts. If Massachusetts was having some governance issue or some huge disaster, we would expect people from California or Alabama to come in and help out and just support Massachusetts through that time and get them through that. It's not that strange to think that Haiti needs some sort of external intervention because they're just in an equilibrium that they're not going to get out of without significant more bloodshed. Full-on civil war is possible. I mean, it's already looking like that with the resistance to the gangs. Is that the best solution? I mean, it's a Haitian solution to the problem in Haiti. Is it the most humanitarian? I don't think that we want it to go that far. But yeah, you always say you bring in the international help with just a lot more oversight, a lot more accountability. And you look at what happened after the earthquake. There's just lots of issues that happened with how the international community came in and tried to help out there. And it wasn't clear that things turned out well. So what do I think is the best solution going forward? If a solution was going to happen, you need some sort of international intervention. You need a high capacity state. So that looks like the United States. The United States does not want to do it. They've tried to lean on Brazil to do it or Canada to do it. I don't think they have many incentives to do that either. So you need a high capacity state that can come in. And the problem is there's going to be pushback. These gangs are not going to give up this territory themselves. And so what it's going to look like is, unfortunately, if there's an intervention, what will happen is it's likely to be foreigners coming in and killing some very key Haitian gang members. And nobody wants that on their PR. No country is going to say, yeah, we're going in. And by the way, we're going to start killing Haitians. But that's just going to be a natural outcome of the resistance that goes on there. So I don't know how you get over that hump of we need someone in here who has enough authority like enough credibility behind what they're doing to say, like, gangs, you no longer rule in this area. Like, your time has come to an end without there being some sort of significant conflict that's going to be international news. And this is why the U.S. hasn't done anything. The U.S. knows, like, if we go in there, there's going to be a conflict. It's going to be international news. What do we gain from this? The U.S. has zero strategic interest in Haiti right now, zero economic interest in Haiti. There's nothing that the U.S. personally is going to gain from a more stable Haiti, other than I hope that we care about the humanitarian issues that are going in Haiti, and we care about the lives that are just being destroyed through this. But then what I've argued for a long time is that we're not going to see the U.S. really care about anything until we see boatloads of Haitians washing up in Florida again. And now all of a sudden it becomes a U.S. issue. And I think what will happen, well, we're coming up into an election year, and both Trump and DeSantis are very anti-immigrant. And so, like, if we start having a situation where you have boatloads of Haitians coming into Florida, that's just going to be fuel for the Republicans to say, like, yeah, look, this is what's going on. The Biden administration's doing nothing. This is why we need to be put in power. And so I think that's going to be what is the final push point for Biden to say, like, we need to go in and do something because this is actually now affecting us. But I just don't know what it would take to have a successful one where we're like not seeing these terrible news stories plastered all around the world. I don't know. Do you have any ideas on how would we be able to, like, have the high capacity with and the accountability to get in there?
I think there is no good answer to this question. However, I do think that the only way forward is for foreign intervention. By no means is that a popular thing to say these days, unfortunately. But because of the very low capacity of Haiti itself, internal inconsistencies down the line, the only way it's going to have any chance, in my view, of kind of successful future is from some kind of U.S. intervention yet again. But of course, because the domestic pressure is going to be very against it, especially how the Afghan pullout went in the first place, I don't know if there's any political will in the US to do this. And this is why I think I'm even more pessimistic than other people, because in my view, the only way is this. But if the US domestically can't do this, then I don't know of any good other options. It's not going to be Canada, it's not going to be Mexico, it's not going to be England, not going to be France. So if the US domestically pushes this forward, we might have a path forward. But as I said, there's so much pressure against it. So I don't have any optimistic view on this question. I think that if I see the conversation going more towards a managed intervention, I might become more optimistic. But until then, I will, retain my stance as it's probably a disequilibrium that's going to be sustained through time.
Yeah. I mean, the country with the biggest probably incentive here is the Dominican Republic.
Yes.
And that's not going to be a solution, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
I don't think they have the capacity even to do anything. Yeah. I just don't know how you weave this careful line of just, we need to stop the gangs from ruling, but to do that is going to require conflict. So in the occupation in 1915, they took a dual strategy. So you had these regular insurgents and they're all camping out, and they did a dual one where they went in and they bought out the insurgents. They're like, hey, sell us your guns. We'll give you amnesty. Don't worry, just go back and live your life. And they did this for like 80,000 insurgents, I think. Just gave them little cards so they could go home and prove, like, nope, look, I received amnesty for my past life. But of course, even with that, I think there's all sorts of incentive problems with that, first off. But at least they tried a humane approach. And then you have the other side where there were people who were unwilling to submit to that. And that went to direct conflict. They were killing people in Haiti. And even with like a possible optimistic situation, you're always going to have those people that hold out. And honestly, even if it's one guy, like one of the gang leaders in Haiti recently reached 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. It was this big controversy. I think he was doing shorts, kind of like TikTok type stuff. And he made a video of him receiving this silver play button, right? The big award that YouTubers get for hitting 100,000. Yeah. And there's this big outrage. Rightfully so, right? Like, this guy is making gang content in Haiti, and you guys are sending him a play button. And so YouTube took down his channel within the week or something. But imagine that's the guy who dies. That story writes itself. Gang leader who had 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, shot by American Marine officer or something. It's just not going to work. And it only takes that one guy to make it. If he's the only casualty through the whole thing, it's still going to be a pretty big deal. And unfortunately, he would not be the only casualty. And then you just have the earthquake. Cholera is brought in by the UN. You've got sexual assault being done by people coming in. You've got all these like half Haitian, half international babies that are being born. You just have like all these issues that are just all bad PR. Like, it's bad fundamentally. But on top of that, it's bad PR. Right. Where these countries are like, we don't want that. But again, it's so hard for me to look at that because there's just the humanitarian case of these are people who are just having their lives ruined. It's just terrible to see the stories of their kids aren't able to go to school. Kidnappings are just crazy right now. They just have so many issues. You wouldn't want anybody to live in that situation. You want something done for them. And we're just all kind of, never mind. It's not our problem because it doesn't affect our strategic or economic interests.
That's right. Kind of reminds me of this quote from Kissinger. He said that, the really hard fundamental political problems are not between good and evil, but between evil and less evil. And I would actually love to ask, the one person I love to ask this question to, like, what would he do in the case of Haiti, would probably Paul Kagame. I don't know if I will ever ask him that question, but I would be very curious because that's the kind of almost in my mental parallel of what state building in a very harsh environment looks like. And anyone who's been to Rwanda, sees differences. But I guess I wonder what he would do in Haiti. In any case, Craig, the last question to you. What are you working on now? What's your immediate research output coming up soon?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of projects I'm really excited about. One is looking at actually some of these very questions in the 1915 occupation. So you have a lot of the narrative around the occupation is that Haitians were not supporting this. This was a terrible thing. Like, they were all supporting the insurgents. When the U.S. leaves, they call it second independence. Just this very unpopular view of the occupation. But I'm using intelligence reports from the military on prominent citizens within Haiti. And they are tracking them. They get their views of what the occupation is. And I find the ones that are around the insurgent camps, like the ones where most of this action is taking place, and so they get to see this firsthand, they're the ones most likely to support the occupation, or at least likely to oppose it. And it's kind of challenging this view of, when they see that the occupation is doing something, because these insurgents aren't just opposing the government. They are like going in and possibly looting villages, setting houses on fire. They see like, hey, you're protecting us from the insurgents. Like, we actually are pretty supportive of this. And I think that's actually really important for the discussion today of, we look at these past occupations as like pretty bad and a lot of people don't like them. But also you have today these people who are being surrounded by gangs and their lives are being disrupted, and they really want somebody to come in and stop this problem. And so there's possibly more support for these things within the country than we historically took for granted. That was just like really interesting to look at the historical parallels to today and write about them. One that's like a really big project that I'm really excited about is we're looking at migration from Haiti to the Dominican Republic in the 40s and 50s. We're working with Family Search, which is an online genealogical resource, and they were able to work with the archives of the Dominican Republic. So we have all these worker permits for Haitians that were coming to the Dominican Republic, and we get to see where they're coming from, what they're doing. We get to see wages. And so we're going to this is with my co-author, Brian Marine, who does a lot. Actually, you should talk to him. He does a lot of work in Puerto Rico, and he would be very interested in talking to, I think. We're working on just trying to create the most extensive understanding of migration to the Dominican Republic, which is going to be primarily Haitian migration. But it's just this really big project that we've started a year ago, and we're just barely getting to the point where we're going to be able to do some cool stuff with it. I'm really excited about what it's going to teach us about Caribbean migration.
Craig, thank you so much for coming on the show for this very insane conversation.